So the subject that we're going to begin to talk about now, by the way, I have a lovely wife. She picks me a nice bowl of fruit here. So isn't that nice? Okay. So I got to have a little bit of a snack. And then she went to bed. Because she's a surgical nurse. She has to be up super early in the morning. So one more month and she's retired. So anyway, all right. So actually about one more month. Okay. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about now is what I call God, gods, or something else. We've got to deal with this issue of who and what is God and how do we understand this. You know, if you walk around and you begin to ask people, say, you know, describe God, everybody will have a different description. Matter of fact, one of the things that I've seen often is when people say, I just don't believe that stuff. I don't believe in God and stuff like that. I say, well, what is it that you struggle with? And often they'll describe what they think about God. And I say, well, you know, I don't believe that either. You know, if that's God, if that's what you understand about God, I agree with you. I don't believe in that one either. That's not the God that I believe in. So what is the God that people believe in? So it's different in every religious tradition and even within the religious tradition. So we've got to basically get some ground rules for how to talk about this. So first thing that we need to recognize is that God is not necessarily a part of religion. You say, what? How can you say that? Well, I'll give you an example. Buddhism, classical Buddhism, God is not even part of it. But God is not even a subject of discussion. Now, Buddha, as we will come to see as we get to it, lived in the Hindu world, in India, and where there are hundreds of millions of divine beings, gods, and yet he didn't include this in what he taught. Matter of fact, he dismissed the discussion of that, wouldn't even engage in it. We'll see more about that later. Confucianism, which we will study after we study Buddhism, and also Daoism, are Chinese religious systems and religious ways of understanding the universe that also do not have the same type of a God idea that we do when we think about God in the West. It isn't there. We'll see that they just don't have a God concept, anything as we would normally understand it. Matter of fact, the earliest religions of humankind didn't deal with what we would call an all-powerful, relatable God. Earliest humankind interacted with forces and the power of nature. So some of the earliest gods are fire, wind, rain even, or, forces of nature, earthquakes, volcanoes were worshipped. Anything that was, beyond our ability to comprehend often became our God. It's only with the development of, religions over the last 4,000 years, really, that, really maybe 6,000 years, that we've begun to get this where we've moved away from worshiping forces to actually understanding God as some sort of being, but that's not universal either. So anyway, so we're going to try and keep this simple. There are two basic ways to understand the human way of talking about God. Looks like I need to shorten this one up a bit here too. Let me bring this in a bit. It's better. Okay. So there are two concepts that we need to deal with. One is called theism, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other is called monism. And so these are two vocabulary words, concepts that we'll be working with. And they're not perfect descriptions of everything, but they do help us understand different ways of seeing this, different ways of understanding. So first of all, theism comes from the Greek word theos. Well, I've got it up here anyway. Theos, which means God. That's the Greek word for God. This is where we get our word theology. Theology is theos, and ology, which means the study of. So theos plus ology is the study of God. That's theology, right? In a few minutes, we're going to talk about what's the difference between religion and philosophy, but just within the area of religion, where we're talking about the study of God is known as theology. And that's from that word theos, which means deity. In Latin, we have deus, D-E-U-S, which we refer to as divinity, which is talking about God once again. So these things come into English. But anyway, so theos is based, the theology, and it was really from the word theologia, which means sayings or word, which equals the study of God. So that's where we get theology. This says that the ultimate cause, the source and power of the universe is, the ultimate cause, the source and power of the universe is a being. So we think of God as a person or a being, not a human person, but something much greater than a human person, right? And when we, we'll see they're all different levels of gods. There are lower gods and higher gods, and so. But when we can identify a person, a being, we call that a theism. I'm going to expand on that in a few minutes. So that's pretty much what we think of normally in the world that we live in. But there's another way to understand God, and it's based on the Greek word monos, which means oneness or one. This says that the ultimate cause, source, and power of the universe is being itself. But there are no attributes of personhood here. So a God, or the God, however you want to think about it, but a God is a being. There's some sort of attribute or characteristic you can relate to a God. You can pray to a God. You can serve a God. You can hear from a God. You can worship a God. You follow what I'm saying? That's a God. But monism is whatever is ultimate in the universe, the highest, the ultimate, the holy, is not a being. It is being itself. So the difference would be from worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the God that's worshipped in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, an identifiable being, the supreme being, but a being who speaks, who acts, who interacts, right? Is involved in history and all these type of things. Has characteristics like being righteous and just and sovereign and omnipotent and omnipotent, all powerful and all knowing and all these type of things, everywhere present, right? We're describing a being. But monism would be something like when you're just saying the universe, or let's just go straight to Star Wars, the Force. If the Force is with you, okay, everything goes well. But the Force, you can't pray to the Force. You can't talk to the Force. It just is. And you're tapping into the Force. You're tapping directly into the source of all existence, right? But that source is not a person. So there are a lot of people who call themselves atheists or agnostics, And really what they're saying is they don't believe in, they're an atheist. They don't believe in a God, a personal being, a being God, but they often believe that being itself, the universe itself, is what they're interested in. And that would be a monistic idea. Let me show you some examples of this here so we can kind of take it out of the word and try and picture this a little bit. So this is a painting of God. I think this is, I think this was Leonardo da Vinci. I'm not sure. I can't remember, or whether it's Michelangelo or who did this, but this is a picture, presentation, representation, a reflection of the idea of God when God creates Adam. And so God is pictured here as a being. Now we know that God is not some old guy with a long white beard in heaven, right? In the sky, reaching out. Now, human beings, we'd all like to look like this version of Adam, at least most of those guys would. He's pretty ripped, but anyway, but the whole idea, but God is pictured as an individual, a being, right? Reaching out to Adam. This is theism, right? This is a theistic understanding of God. Hopefully you're with me on this. This is the symbol for Brahman, which is the ultimate in Hinduism. We'll be talking about this, but Brahman is not a person. Brahman just is. Brahman is being itself. And the symbol in the middle of it, that's the symbol for which is the central vibration of the universe. So this is how you would picture the ultimate in Hinduism. Now, Hinduism will also have beings as well, but the ultimate is not a god, and there are bunches of gods in Hinduism, but it is Brahman. And Brahman is not a being. Brahman is sexless, colorless, non-physical. You can't pray to Brahman. Brahman's just a description, a label, but is not a being that you can relate to. You can't love Brahman, and Brahman can't love you. Brahman just is. We'll dig into this more as we move into Hinduism. Let's stick with the idea here for a second. This is the symbol known as the Tao, which means the way. And this is a symbol for the force. By the way, this is the force that George Lucas was talking about. What influenced him in creating the Star Wars saga. It's a Chinese understanding of the ultimate in the universe. It is not a being. There's a oneness. This force is a wholeness, and we'll study this when we get to Chinese religion, but you can't pray to it. It will not intervene on your behalf. You can be in harmony with it, but it's an it. It's not a he or she. It's not a being. It's hard to even call it an it because it is just ultimate. So this would be a monistic understanding of the nature of the ultimate. So let's break this down into some identifiable religions. So theism says that whatever is ultimate, that the holy, the ultimate of the universe has attributes, has characteristics, can be related to. So that would be the God that identified that the Hebrew is just, it's a Y and H, a V and an H. Jews don't pronounce this word. We don't put vowels in it. I mean, you try to pronounce that. Yeah, no vowels. How do you pronounce that? That's probably the best way to pronounce it based on what it means. and based on Jewish tradition of the vows that are not placed in there in the text, because this is considered too holy. This is the covenant name of God. And so there are many other names and titles for God, but this is the central covenant name. It's too holy to be uttered with human lips. So Jews just don't use it. But the letters that are written in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, with the first 5 books are known as Torah. When Moses encounters God at the burning bush, and God tells him, say, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh, and you're going to lead my people out of Egypt and lead them in the promised land, and so they could worship me and all this kind of stuff. And Moses agrees. He says, okay, yeah, it sounds good. I'm up for the job. But what's your name? Because there are many gods. And so, who shall I say sent me when I go to Pharaoh and go to the Jewish people? And he said, I am that I am. But that's what the word means. So the way to pronounce it would be Yahweh. Sometimes people say Yahweh, but that would, more accurate Hebrew translation would be Yahweh. But you shouldn't pronounce that. That would be like going to visit Washington, D.C., walking into the president's office and saying, hey, Joe, nice to meet you. You wouldn't say that. Out of respect for the office, you would say, Mr. President, right? You wouldn't actually say the name. You would go with the title. So, that's the kind of the idea here. God is so magnificent and holy that to actually utter the words. But anyway, so the idea that Jews generally refer to this as Avinu, our Father. Matter of fact, that's what Jesus used when his disciples said, teach us to pray. And he says, when you pray, pray like this, our Father who is in heaven, that's just a Jewish teaching. That's the way Jews address God. They don't address him by his name. That's too familiar. They address him by title, some other descriptive way. So Christians also worship the Heavenly Father. Now, leave aside all the stuff that developed 200 years after the origins of Christianity with regard to the Trinity and all that kind of stuff. We'll deal with that, touch on that a little bit when we get to Christianity, but that's a whole nother story. But ask any Christian, if you got to say, who is God, the ultimate God of the universe? Who is God? And they'll say, God, our Father, right? Okay, so same thing in Islam. The God, these are all theistic concepts because you relate to this God, right? This God speaks, this God hears, this God responds. So it's a theism. But in Islam, you have Allah, which just means, by the way, it's not a different name. In the Quran, there are like 100 different names and titles for God, just as there are in the Hebrew Bible. And Christians call God Lord and, the Almighty and the Most High. And, we have all ways of titles and descriptions of God. But this word Allah means the God. That's all it means. Al is the, and Ilah means God. And so you put Ah and Ilah together, it becomes Allah, which is the God. It's the same God the Jews are referring to when they say Avinu, our Father. Same thing the Christians are saying when they say our Father. and it's the same God. It's the only God, according to all 3 of these religions. So that's got to be who we're talking about, because there are no other gods, according to Judaism, Christianity, Islam, right? So there is no other God than God. All right, so that's who we're talking about here. Now, their understanding of how that God relates to people, right, will be nuanced. It'll be different, right? And within Judaism and within Christianity and within Islam, there are many different understandings, but we know who we're talking about. We know we're not talking about, someone else. We know who we're talking about. All right. So, and other theistic theisms would be in Hinduism, what we're going to see, and I trust you've started. Well, by now you should have watched the video. I hope you have. The 330 Million Gods video. So you've got some sort of picture of this huge subject that we're undertaking, but you have individual gods in Hinduism, like Vishnu and Shiva and Saraswati. Saraswati had a big role in the video, the goddess of knowledge and learning. You saw a bunch about her in the video. You saw her get dunked in a pond at the end of the celebration, right? You saw the image of Saraswati getting, dunked. Should see some heads saying, I've watched that. Of course, I only see 2 and 1/4 of heads because you've turned off everybody's turned off. But anyway, so I can't tell whether you're getting this or not if you don't put your camera on and let me see your responses, because I'm trying to reach you. I'm not just trying to go through a lecture. We could do that, this would be a totally online class and no response, and I just give it, either you get it or you don't. Okay. So anyway, but these are all theistic ideas of God. Then monistic ideas would be like the Chinese Tao, which I just showed you, or in Hinduism, there is Brahman, who is really the ultimate, but is not a being. So when I say who, that's really not a good description. When I said who is the ultimate, Brahman isn't a who. Brahman just is. Brahman is being itself. And then in Buddhism, where there is no God, but what is ultimate in Buddhism is nirvana, the void, the place where everything is extinguished, blown out. Blow out a candle, flame's gone. That's what nirvana means. These are, this is the ultimate conception. So the ultimate conception in monism is really being itself, right? But the ultimate in theism is a being who is the source of all being, but is in itself is a being. Hopefully you got that. Let's look at some theistic ideas, because this is where it maybe will help us understand theism. There are a lot of different ways to look at theism. Now, this is perfect. I saw some different graphs a couple of years ago, diagrams, trying to visualize this. And I saw some of this, thought, oh, this is good. So I just, on Wikipedia, so I just stole it and then learned how to do these things myself. And this is not the only different types of theisms, the only ways to think about a personal God, a being God. But these are some of the main ones that we're going to be encountering. And I think it's enough just to get us started here. So the first illustration here is theism. You don't see me moving my cursor there. Okay. But anyway, the first one on the left. And so theism, and this is our classical theism, whereas there's God, and then God creates the universe, and the universe is not God. The universe is external to God. The universe is created. God is not created. God is, but it's a personal God who creates the universe and relates to the universe, but the universe is outside. So this is pretty much the common understanding of what's going on in many theisms, and the most significant theisms are monotheistic, where there's only one God. But here's another view of a one God, This is known as pantheism. So theism means God as a personal being. But in this case, pan means all. And so God is the universe because God is all. That's pantheism at its simplest level. You don't need to understand all this. I'm just using this as illustrations. You can dig into this as much as you want. Then there's another way that's a little bit more nuanced than pantheism, known as panentheism. It just means that all in God. That's what it means. All in Theos. So the way I try to represent this here is there you have God, and God creates the universe, but the universe is part of God. It's not external to God, right? So think as panentheism as a pregnant woman. The creation, the new birth, is within her. She encompasses it, right? That's another way to think of it. Right? So that's panentheism. Panentheism is surprisingly significant and powerful in monotheistic circles, but I'm not going to get into all that now. I had, when I first moved to the Chicago area in 1999, we were attending a synagogue on the North Shore because we were living in Highland Park when I was teaching in Singapore, and we came back to the United States for my daughter's education. My wife found a job immediately as a surgical nurse at Highland Park Hospital, so we moved to Highland Park. And then we found through my daughter Abigail, who was in 8th grade at the time, her first day of 8th grade. I think it was her first day of 8th grade. I think it was 8th grade. Lose track of the details. She got a ride home from a friend that she had met at school, in middle school, and the woman had called us, and said, "Is it all right if I give Abigail a ride home?" I said, "Yeah, save me picking her up." And so anyway, we got to meet this other girl's mother, and it turned out that she was Jewish. And we were brand new. We had been here like 3 weeks. We're still unpacking. Matter of fact, a lot of our stuff hadn't arrived from Singapore yet. We were waiting for the crate to arrive so we could, finish moving in. But anyway, we met her. She said, and we got to talking, and we found out that we were both Jewish and that we had something in common. And she said, I really think you need to meet my rabbi. And so I did, and it turned out that we met this rabbi, and he was, it was a very wonderful person, and open, and just welcoming, and we became a part of that congregation. And as I got to know the rabbi in classes together with him, and some of which he let me teach or help teach, I found out that actually his understanding of the one God was really more panentheistic. I never really quite understood that at the time. So I had to kind of dig into panentheism. Anyway, it's all another story. So there are different ways to understand God, but however you understand God in God's relationship to creation, that's what these reflect. God in relationship to creation. The idea is that the God in all of these is a being, a person. Not a human person, but a person, a being. And then polytheism here on the far right. And I just kind of said, okay, well, you can have God outside of the created universe. You can have God inside the created universe. You can have God straddling both the created universe and being outside the, just about any idea of a God or gods can be in any relationship to creation. and you can do a gazillion of these things and get lost in it, but this is just to give you an idea for the feel of what we're going to be dealing with in Hinduism is definitely this last one on the right, polytheism, where there are many gods, but the ultimate God is not a God, is not a God, it is Brahman, who you should have already heard a little bit about and read just a little bit about as you're beginning to read the Hinduism chapter. So that is the ultimate. That's what everybody's really reaching for. And really, in Hinduism, you basically employ the lower gods, the beings, to help you reach up towards union with Brahma. And this, well, we're going to talk about this a bunch in this class. There's one last thing I want to talk about before we can really dig into our first major religion, which is Hinduism, because this is a cross-listed course. Some of you are taking this for philosophy credit, and some of you are taking it for religious studies credit. It's the same course, it's the same material. But whether you're taking this for religious studies or whether you're taking this for philosophy, we need to understand the difference between philosophy and religion, because there are differences. So I just want to make a couple of comments about what philosophy is. In general, what philosophizing is, or what philosophy is, it's thinking, it's processing, it's considering, and it's evaluating. That's what we do in philosophy. We think, we gain a perspective, we try to understand, we evaluate, we consider, we process things. It's a human thing. It's something that we do with our intellect. And philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia. Philos means love, and Sophia is the word for wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom. So if somebody says, what's philosophy? You say, what's the love of wisdom? Right? Religious wisdom, human wisdom, whatever's wise, whatever is, wise, that's part of philosophy. So it involves thinking, processing, considering, evaluating. It's the perception. Philosophy is the perception of our place and function in the universe as we can understand with our human faculties, our mind. Now, we've already said that religion is not, that faith is not a human way of thinking. It's a human way of thinking, but it's not, it doesn't fit into intellectual, what we normally think of ideation and stuff like that as far as intellectual. So let's look at some of the commonalities between philosophy and religion, because this has been confusing. And this was confusing to me. So there's things that are very similar, subject matter that is covered in both philosophy and religion. You have the nature of good and evil, how good comes to be or what it is, and how evil comes to be or what it is, considering, trying to evaluate and process good and evil. So both religions and philosophies do that. Living a good, meaningful life, that's found in both religion and philosophy. So it seems like we could be talking about the same thing here, right? Values come out of philosophy and values come out of religion. So yeah, there's no difference there. Morality and ethics come out of religion and can come out of philosophy, come out of both. The purpose of our existence can be thought about in philosophy, can also be thought about from a religious perspective. Relationships and how to relate to people and the world and all that is something that you find in religion and philosophy. So that's not much help, is it? No, it's helpful to see that there's some things there. Let's take this a little bit different, or let's expand this a little bit. In philosophy, we use critical thinking. Matter of fact, at the school, we promote that you use critical thinking, that you learn to not critical thinking, I don't like it, but critical thinking in the sense that you're using all of your thinking abilities and you're thinking about it, you're examining and you're pursuing and you're looking at and you're testing and all these kind of things. So philosophy in the realm of thought uses critical thinking. In philosophy, well, so in religion, critical thinking is not part of the ballgame. I'm not saying that it can't be used, but at its core, religion focuses on experience, so it reflects on the experience rather than on the thinking, which is ritual and ceremony. In philosophy, we know rationally, we know empirically, and we know logically. In religion, faith is prior to all that. So in order to get to a philosophical perspective, we have to think rationally, empirically, and logically. In faith, to get to a faith perspective, you got to start with faith. And then you can begin to rationalize it and think about it empirically and logically. In philosophy, the authority is the human mind. That's the authority. In religion, the authority is beyond the human mind. What the human mind can do is great, but there's something more. There's something greater. In philosophy, the source of our thinking, the source of our being is our mind. In religion, the source of our being is above all. It's above the creation. It's not part of the creation. It is above all that. In philosophy, there's nothing miraculous. All can be explained, or we can just say we don't understand, but we can hope to explain it someday. And there's no divine interaction. So if something that seems miraculous or amazing or unique happens, we don't think in philosophy, it's not appropriate to say God did it. God intervened. But in religion, miracle is seen as divine intervention. It's God actually intervening. That's what the reason, what we can't, the miraculous or magical, often people think of, is the intervention of God. In philosophy, there's no divine interaction, right? It is a human way of thinking, and it does not include, it's just a different, yeah. This is just an illustration, so I'm not going to argue and try and prove my illustration. I'm just pointing out some things here. So remember when we first started our discussion of religion, we said that religion involves commitment. I talked about that tonight about faith. It involves commitment, trust, right? And remember that religare, the Latin word that we defined earlier in the first section of this course, is to bind, to make loyal, to attach to something so significant that you don't want to let go. This is the major difference that ultimately exists between philosophy and religion, is that there's commitment in religion. A lot of beautiful philosophies in life out there in the world. There's some evil ones too, but you know, philosophy is an amazing expression of the human mind. But with religion, we go beyond the mind. And in philosophy, there's no commitment. It's just what you're thinking right now. It's what you understand right now, but it's no commitment. Religion is all about the commitment. When you try to sort through all these details, just using the human intellect, this all gets confusing really quickly. Or at least you have to build a whole new structure of thought to deal with everything. And that can frustrate us because we just want to understand how people live, what they experience. It doesn't have to make sense. I just need to know what it is. What are they committed to? We can't spend all our time analyzing every idea we encounter, or we could never get on with actually living. For me and for us in this course, we will not be analyzing the reasonableness, the rationality, or even the truth of what different people in the world think or believe. What we want to see is how this all works out in people's lives. So the 8 billion people in the world, most just get on with believing whatever they believe and rarely ask questions about whether it's rational or not. It just is. And we want to understand in this course the it that is. Religion tells us what it is without having to do analysis, without having to pick it apart and try to intellectualize it. Religion lets us observe people's actions, what they believe, what it is, how they live it out, what they experience. And once we understand the core ideas, we can dig deeper and begin to analyze, and that will be what you can do when you finish this course. But for now, we just want to observe and understand. So religion involves commitment, and really, this is where the authority, the commitment in religion overwhelms philosophies, thoughts, ideas, as good as they are. Because people are more influenced by religious ideation than philosophical ideation. Religious ideation seems intuitive or instinctive. Religious ideation does not require training or study, although that certainly happens within religion. People just get it. They find themselves believing in things and holding to ideas without knowing why. Now, they can rationalize it later and understand why, but we call this faith. So we will need to examine the way of knowing that is almost instinctive. No matter how deep the philosophical thought, it's overpowered by the authority of religious thinking. And I pulled up here a quote from Isaiah in the Hebrew scriptures, the prophet Isaiah, chapter 55. And this is from the New American Standard Translation, which is good if you're a standard American. It's of all the English translations of the Hebrew text, I find this the most accurate, the most reflective, one of the better translations, right? Now, the best way to actually read a text is in its original language, but unless you know Hebrew, that can take a while. I used to teach it in graduate school, but it's not easy. Okay, I've never become fluent in it myself, but I'm fairly fluent in English. So I just want to read this from this. It says, "This is God speaking through the prophet Isaiah." So Isaiah is speaking for God in chapter 55, and he says, speaking for God, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." There's something more than the greatest thoughts. God's not saying your thoughts suck. He's just saying it can only take you so far. And as high as the heavens are above the earth, that's how much higher my thoughts are and my ways are than yours. So what this is saying is keep in mind that there's also more to religion than just God. God is ultimate, but there are religions that focus not on God, but on truths about the nature of life and being. As I mentioned, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Daoism especially. There are significant elements of religion that really have nothing to do with God or gods. We'll be studying some things that have nothing to do with God or gods. Karma, which is the main engine of understanding Hinduism. Karma. Reincarnation has nothing to do with God. Even love as a force in many religions have nothing to do with God. So we're going to talk about God. And what we need to understand is all that we can understand is as high as we can go, as much information as we can get, as much understanding we can get. We're not even scratching the surface, but we want to head in that direction. We want to strive to understand everything we can understand, to gain an appreciation of who and what God is. But we need to, but the best way to do that is, rather than spend our time in theology and getting lost in theological arguments, just talk to other people about what their direct experience of God is, how they understand God in their lives. Because that's really all you can talk about at the end of the day. So it is the end of the day. It is 8:55. It's time to go. So I will see you next week.